On July 3, 1979, around 3:45 a.m., a strangled body of a young woman was found along Highway 54 in Graham, Alamance County, North Carolina, USA.
This, it's terrible to lose a child.
The victim was identified as Tammy Sue Aldridge, a 20-year-old college student who had gone for a jog near Jim Barnwell Road, but had never returned. She was killed ruthlessly, and unfortunately, her case had remained unsolved and cold for almost 45 years. Now the question was, who committed such a heinous act against her, and was the perpetrator eventually punished? Born on April 16, 1959, in Alamance County, Tammy was raised by her parents, Jimmy Ray Aldridge and Shelby Aldridge. In 1979, Tammy was a 20-year-old youthful girl with big dreams for life ahead. After graduating from Eastern Alamance High School, she enrolled in East Carolina University. According to her family, she was a bright student who dreamt of becoming a physical therapist to help the elderly with their ailments and make them feel better. In June of 1979, Tammy was enjoying a summer break and spending time with her family. As a health enthusiast, Tammy went for her daily jog on June 30, 1979, near Jim Barnwell Road. But as time passed that day, she did not return. Concerned, her family started searching for her, unaware of where she had gone. They filed a missing person report at the nearby police station and kept waiting for her return. After the report, the local police launched an immediate search campaign, but they were unable to find her. After the initial investigation, the police believed that Tammy had been kidnapped on June 30th, as there was no reason for her disappearance. Fearing for the worst, her family patiently awaited any contact from Tammy, while the police kept looking. However, over the next 2 days, Tammy had called home once on Sunday, July 1st, and then again on Monday, July 2nd. Over that call, she claimed that she was fine, but when asked about her location, she sounded distressed and refused to reveal any information. Based on how she sounded over the call, her unwillingness to reveal her location, the police were now assured that she had indeed been kidnapped, and that during the call, Tammy was under coercion from the kidnapper. What was surprising is that the kidnapper had not asked for any ransom, and on July 2, 1979, would be the last time Tammy's family would ever hear from her. The next day, July 3, 1979, a passing driver made a grim discovery. He spotted Tammy Sue Aldridge's lifeless body in the middle of Highway 54 in Graham. The evidence of assault was very clear from the condition of the dead body. Tammy's death shattered the family, leaving them yearning for justice to be served in her memory. Just after the discovery of Tammy's dead body, an immediate investigation was launched. When investigators discovered Tammy, her body was still warm, indicating that she had been killed an hour ago.
She hadn't been deceased very long when her body was found. It was still warm to the touch. No type of rigor had set in. And so the medical examiner estimated she couldn't have been dead any more than an hour.
Investigators noted that her shorts were worn backward and her shirt was upside down, indicating that her clothes were put on after death. She was assaulted before death and bodily fluids were found on her. Her ankles were bound by rope. Her neck and hands were also tied up, evident from the rope burns around them. An autopsy was conducted by the North Carolina medical examiners, and the report concluded that she had died from strangulation. Medical reports also confirmed that she was assaulted and abused before being killed and left along the road. Later, DNA samples were tested, but investigators couldn't find a match to any suspect. Investigators continued to search for any leads in the case. Initially, a man named Paul Tigg was suspected and arrested in the case. But after further investigation, he was found not guilty and was released. Despite their efforts, no suspects were arrested further in this case. With insufficient evidence and no other leads to follow, the case went cold and had remained unsolved for decades. In 2020, after 41 long years, the case of Tammy Sue Aldridge had been reopened by authorities of Almanac County's Sheriff's Office when they decided to solve old unsolved cases. Sheriff Terry Johnson mentioned that Tammy's murder was one of several cold cases he chose to reopen when he first joined the Sheriff's Office back in 2002. Finally, they took the decades-old murder case of Tammy Sue Aldridge into their hands. Initially, the detectives under Sheriff Terry's command also struggled to solve this murder mystery. Just like the first generation of investigators who worked on the case before them many years ago. However, investigators scoured for any clues and meticulously examined every file and available materials in the case. But they found nothing. One day, the lead investigator, Sergeant Dan Denton, after extensive research, noticed the name Gary Lane Laframboise on a slip of paper left in one of the case files by someone. That name caught his attention, and he suspected that name to be crucial for the case. Perhaps another investigator got that name in the past while working on the case. Sergeant Denton said, finding his name was the biggest thing. In the long run, Gary Lane Laframboise was never seriously considered the suspect in the case. But when authorities searched more about Laframboise, they found many crucial details linking him further to the case. In 1979, Laframboise was 19 to 20 years old and used to live in Graham, around 4.5 miles from where Tammy's body was discovered. He was a native of California who moved from Florida to Alamance County in 1978. Surprisingly, on October 11, 1979, he was arrested a little over 3 months after Tammy's murder. However, this arrest was for a different case by Graham City Police Department. He faced charges in another kidnapping case and for impersonating a police officer. On December 4, 1979, Gary Lane Laframboise was found guilty of those charges, including a serious assault on an Alamance County Sheriff's Deputy Detention Officer. It was reported that he had fractured the deputy's skull during his time in custody. He served 2 years imprisonment, from May 8, 1980 to August 25, 1982. Then he stayed in North Carolina for about another decade after his release in 1982. However, by the time Sheriff Terry Johnson reopened the investigation into Tammy's murder case more than 2 decades later, the suspected killer, Laframboise, seemed to have been forgotten. Sergeant Denton acknowledged that finding Laframboise's name was just the beginning of proving his involvement in Tammy's case. As the next step, investigators decided to conduct a DNA test to find a match. They started searching for DNA samples in the case. Fortunately, in 2021, the Sheriff's Office successfully retrieved DNA from decades-old preserved bodily fluids found on the victim's body, and they sent it for advanced DNA testing.
This officer was able to take the sample found on Tammy Sue Aldridge and able to submit it for further investigation.
However, authorities faced challenges in the process of a DNA match as Laframboise had died the previous year in 2020. Then authorities searched for some of Laframboise's family members who were still alive. They contacted those family members, and finally, Laframboise's daughter was convinced to help the investigators match the DNA. Then DNA was collected from Laframboise's daughter and sent for testing. After some time, investigators got the test results in hand. Finally, through advanced genealogical DNA analysis, investigators got closure for Tammy Sue Aldridge's murder case. The DNA was matched to Gary Lane LaFramboise.
Suspect was deceased, and through the family, one of his daughters agreed to give her DNA, and they were able to take her DNA and make the match.
Now the question arose, why wasn't the case solved through DNA analysis decades ago? In response, authorities had clarified that a state forensic lab had previously failed to match the DNA sample with any other potential suspect in Tammy's death, as DNA testing technology was less advanced back then. Denton also mentioned that the DNA connection was eventually strengthened with the help of advanced genealogical DNA analysis, pioneered by the officials in California as a crime-solving tool in 2016. Finally, after 45 years, authorities identified the killer in Tammy Sue Aldridge's case. Now, the challenge was that authorities had no image of the killer when he was around 20 years old, as his mugshot from the kidnapping case had been lost. Finally, the sheriff's office experts of age regression photography developed an image of Gary Lane LaFramboise as he would have looked in 1979. For the first time, the killer's face was revealed in this case.
Every family should have closure.
On April 4th, 2024, the Alamance County Sheriff's Office held a press conference and finally concluded the case of Tammy Sue Aldridge, that Gary Lane LaFramboise was the killer. During the press conference, Terry Johnson said, "This is a sad day and sort of glad day. It's sad because it took 45 years to develop a suspect in this case. But I'm also glad that I'm able to stand here and say, we've identified the perpetrator." The investigating authority became emotional while discussing Tammy's tragic case.
Would hear from her. North Carolina State Medical Examiner ruled it death by strangulation.
Tammy's family and friends had attended the press conference, and they were happy to get closure in this case. Her uncle, Ken Aldridge, became emotional during his speech and thanked everyone for their efforts in bringing closure to the case.
We want to thank you for what you've done.
Yes, sir.
And Cindy, thank you, Morgan.
And Cindy spent many hours working on this.
Yeah. And like I said, closure is going to be different for each of us. Okay.
Right.
Sorry, I'm a little bit emotional, but your work does mean a lot for us.
Well, thank you. It was, like I said, it was a team effort. It wasn't an individual effort.
And complete closure will never be lived.
However, the investigating authorities couldn't establish whether Gary Lane LaFramboise acted alone in Tammy's murder, or if another person was involved in the case. In the end, the questions continue to linger. Why was she kidnapped and ruthlessly killed? With Gary Lane LaFramboise's death, it seems that the question will remain unanswered forever.